My name is Henrietta Weigel, and we are in my condo in Bloomington, Minnesota, and I grew up in Zeeland, North Dakota.
Why don't you tell me about growing up in Zeeland, North Dakota? Did you grow up on a farm?
Yes, I grew up on a farm.
Tell me about that. What was it like growing up on a farm?
Well, when I grew up on the farm, I just really got used to doing the normal things like milking cows and carrying water and and everything that we did on the farm is it had to be done by hand. We didn't have modern machinery to help us out. We didn't have any telephone to call the neighbors to see how they were doing. And for a very long time, we didn't have any electricity. And so the house we lived in, we had what they called the 32 volt. And so um, we had lights in the house, and we had maybe one or two outlets for a radio, but other than that, we couldn't use the 32 volt, and we didn't have no air conditioning, and um, I guess when we would go to town to shop for groceries, it was not like it is nowadays. We were very restricted in what we could buy, and could probably buy like flour in bulk and sugar in bulk and ground coffee in bulk and peanut butter and Carol's syrup, and all the meat that we ate, we supplied our own meat. We would butcher our own chickens, our own cow and own pig, and that's how we survived. And then in the summertime, we would plant a garden, and we would raise like potatoes and cabbage and cucumbers and tomatoes and carrots and radishes and onions. And my mom would plant flowers. And so then in the summertime, we ate real healthy, but in the wintertime, not so much, because we didn't have, like you do nowadays, you can go to the store and buy the fresh vegetables. We didn't have that option. Fruit was the same way. My mom and dad would buy, a truck would come around and sell oranges and apples in a crate, and we'd buy that in bulk. But when you went to the store, those options were just not available. We would have our own milk, and we would save milk from the cow in the morning, and whatever we didn't drink that day was tossed the next day. And the basic, what we really lived on is that we would milk the cows, and then the milk was separated, and we would sell the cream, and with the cream money, that's what my mom would use to buy groceries and other miscellaneous bills. And then once a year, after the wheat crop was combined and the wheat was sold, then the bigger bills got paid, like the gas that was used for the tractor when the tractor was used. We did a lot of work on the farm with horses. We would haul hay with the horses and pick rocks on the field with the horses. And my mom would rake the crop, the hay crop with the rake and the horses. Somehow my dad had a tractor with a mower on, so then he would mow, and we had a tractor that he would use in the spring to plow, but it was like only a 3-bottom plow, and it's not like nowadays you can plow and plant all at the same time. We would have to go up and plow, and then once it was plowed, then it would get planted, and then after it was planted, then we got dragged so everything was smooth, and then after everything was dragged, then we had to go through and pick up the rocks. We'd spend like 2 weeks walking around on the field picking up rocks. And I can remember one time, Kathy and I, we decided we just didn't want to pick rocks. So my mom, she enticed us. She said, well, if you go out and pick rocks, I'll buy you an Eskimo pie. So that made us happy. So we did go out and pick rocks to keep her happy. But it was hard work to walk around on the field.
How young were you when you started doing chores like that?
I was probably like 12 or 13.
Did you ever get to work, like drive the tractors or do that sort of thing?
No, I didn't. I was not allowed to drive the tractors, but I was able to when we used the horses, like when we loaded hay on the wagon, I was able to maneuver the horses so that they wouldn't get spooked and go to the left or to the right, so they would go down and pick up the row that was to be picked up with the hay loader. So,
how big a family did you have?
I had one sister and 2 brothers.
Did you find that the boys had certain things that they were assigned to do, and the girls had certain things that they were assigned to do as far as chores?
No, because Kathy and I were kind of like a family, and then 13 years later, my first brother was born, and then 16 years later, the second brother was born.
So there would have been, that gap in age would have been just
Yes.
a different experience for sure. When you were talking about the farm and no electricity and that sort of thing, what time period was that? The 40s, the 50s? What was it?
That was, well, my mom and dad moved on the farm like in 1947, and we didn't get any electricity till, I believe, 1954.
So there was a good period there.
Yes.
How about things like indoor plumbing and running water and that sort of thing?
We didn't have either. I mean, there was no indoor toilet. Well, the indoor toilet we had was either, we had one of them, I don't even know what you call it. It was like, it almost looked like an indoor toilet, but it was a container where you would, and it was piped outside so you wouldn't get the smell in the house. And then there was a pail in the inside where you would put water and chemical in there, and then once a week that stuff was carried outside and dumped. That's what we used in the wintertime. But in the summer we would use the outdoor toilet. And the running water, we didn't have running water. The water we used in the house, we had to carry in, and then if we wanted to cook with it, we had to boil it or use it cold. And the same way when we washed dishes, you had to warm the water, heat the water, and then when we were done, you had to carry it outside and dump it.
So was there a well that you were getting the water from?
Yes, we had a well. We had 2 wells. We had one that was real close to the barn, but we never used that water. And now I kind of determined that it probably was a good idea we didn't use it because of all the cow and animal stuff that probably drained into the water. So we had another well. It was like almost like a surface well because it was like maybe 10 feet deep, and it was, I would probably say, a good block from the house. It was quite a struggle because we had to go up a slight incline to bring it up, and so we would carry in all the water from there to wash the clothes, all the cooking, and then in the wintertime I can remember that would freeze up, and so then we had to go get some water and heat it up, and then go down and pour the hot water over it so that it would melt the ice and we could use the pump and pump water. And that was all hand pumped. We didn't have a motor that would pump it for us. We had the windmill, and somehow in the wintertime we never used the windmill.
That must have been quite a chore, though. I mean, when you think about that's something you had to do every day.
Yes.
So, school. Did you go to the school? Where'd you go to school?
We had a country school, and that was to the south of where we lived, and it was probably maybe around a half mile or maybe a little more. And we had to, cross the neighbors' prairie land where they kept cows, climb over the barbed wire and then walk so far and then climb it again and get over on the other side. And then the ground was plowed, so then we had to walk across plowed field to get to school. And the school didn't have any electricity, no running water, outdoor toilet, and so we had to carry our lunch and water to school on every day. And sometimes we had to walk around the outside of the prairie because the neighbor had cows in there, and they had a bull, and the bull had really long horns, so we were afraid of the bull, so we would walk around the outside because we figured, well, if he comes after us, we wouldn't be able to run fast enough. So
many kids from your generation, their first language was German. How about you? Was your first language German?
It was German. I can remember one of my dad's brothers and wife that lived in Minneapolis. They came to visit us, and my uncle's wife, or my aunt, she couldn't speak German, so I guess we had quite a conversation going. We couldn't speak English and she couldn't speak German. And then when I went to school, I didn't know how to speak German either, so the teacher had to teach me how to speak English.
When you were in school, did you always have to do everything in English?
Yes.
Were the teachers pretty strict about that?
I don't remember that became an issue because, all the workbooks were in English and the books that we read were in English.
Could you speak German with your playmates on the school ground, or did you have to speak English out there?
I don't remember that was a problem.
Probably was from teacher to teacher, what in school to school. So how long did you go to the country school for?
8 years.
Did you go to high school after that?
No, I didn't. My mom and dad decided they couldn't afford to take me to high school because that meant that they would have had to drive me to town in the morning and then pick me up at night or find me a place to stay. And at that point, my oldest brother was born, and so I had to stay home and help with taking care of him and whatever else chores I needed to do to help out. And so what happened to me is after my mom moved to town, she sold the farm and moved to Aberdeen, South Dakota. Then I got a letter in the mail from the National School of Business in Rapid City, and they were asking me to become a student there. So I hand wrote them a letter, because I didn't have a typewriter, and that's the only way I knew how to communicate, and we had no telephone. So I hand wrote a letter to them and explained to them, will you still accept me if I don't have a high school diploma? And they came back and said, no problem. So I took the bus to Rapid City, and the school had representatives there, so they met me at the bus depot, and I told them I didn't have any money to stay anywhere, so they found me a place to stay, their room and board. I had to work for my room and board, and then I could take the bus to school in the morning and home at night. And then I remember I only stayed there a short while because the family they hooked me up with was a divorced lady, and she had a couple of girls, and she had a boyfriend. So I decided, I don't think I want to live in this environment. I was afraid, her boyfriend would come and rape me. So I went back to the school and said, I don't want to stay here. I didn't feel comfortable. So then they found me a family where there was a husband and wife and children. And so I was happy with that and went to school. And then the school set me up to do my GED test, which I did, which was called the South Dakota School of Mines back then. Now it's North Dakota Technology School. And then I graduated, and I came back to Aberdeen, and I probably was unemployed for a month or so. And then I found a job at Hub City Iron, but now it's called Safeguards. And what they did is they manufactured gearboxes for farm equipment. And so my job was to make copies of all the blueprints, and the blueprints got changed a lot, so that kept me really busy of throwing the old ones out and making new copies for the file, copies for the customer. And then they had a fire safe downstairs, and we had to have the latest copy in the fire safe too in case of a fire. And I stayed there maybe a little over a year. And so then Cargill Incorporated from Minneapolis put an ad in the Aberdeen newspaper saying that at such and such a day they would have somebody there from their HR department, and they would interview people that they would like to hire to bring back to Minneapolis and go to work for them. And so my sister Kathy went there during the day and applied and got a job right away. I worked the whole day, and then I went there after work and got interviewed, it's totally different than you are nowadays, because all I had to do was take the math, spelling, and typing test. And so then the person that interviewed me said, well, she didn't have a job for me at this point. She was going to go back to Minneapolis and then let me know if there was anything else that I could do. So she went home back to Minneapolis, and then probably a week or so later, she sent me a letter and told me she had this job available for me at $220 a month, which was more than I made in Aberdeen. And so I hand wrote her a letter back and said, I accept the job. And meanwhile, and then I turned in my resignation at Safeguard, and Kathy, at that point, I had a car, she didn't have a car, so she was in Minneapolis working, so she took the bus home, and we packed up the car and we drove to Minneapolis, because then we had an uncle that lived in Fridley, and he helped Kathy find an apartment. So now it was out in Columbia Heights. So we had quite a time finding that apartment, because coming in at night, not knowing where anything is, there was no GPS and no telephone. So I don't remember if we stopped at a gas station to get directions, but somehow we found it. And that was quite an experience for me too, you know, well, I was used to getting up in the morning and jumping in the car and driving to work, being there in 5 minutes or 10. And I was done at night, I jumped in the car and drove back home again. Well, in Minneapolis.
So interesting stuff. So how old were you when you came to Minneapolis?
I was 23.
So when you went to that school in Rapid City, how old were you, do you think?
I was 21.
So you worked on the farm, helping out on the farm, your family farm, until you were about 21?
No, I didn't. I worked on the family farm till I was about 18, and my mom had 3 sisters living in Aberdeen, and they convinced me to come to Aberdeen and they'd help me find a job. So I moved to Aberdeen, and I would stay at the different aunts, you know, a week here and a week there. And the very first job I had was working for the Flame Cafe in Aberdeen, washing dishes. So I would wash dishes at night, you know, like say around 7 till the restaurant closed, which was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And one of my uncles would give me a ride there when I started, and then come and pick me up. But then after several months, my uncle decided he can't continue doing this because he had his job and he had to get up early in the morning, and that was really interfering with his sleep. So then I left that job. And so then again I was unemployed, and I found this job working in a drive-through restaurant, which was also seasonal. And I would have the intercom, the car would drive up and they placed their order. Or no, they wouldn't place their order. You would have to go out and hand write the order on a piece of paper and then take it back. And then when the order was complete, you would bring the order back, and they had to open their window, and you had this tray, and you had to hang the tray on the window. And then I remember maybe working there only 1 season, and then my grandma, at that time my grandma and grandpa were still living there, and so then they had their neighbor across the alley was an elderly lady and her son didn't want her to stay home alone, so then they hired me to come in during the day and do light housework and be with her while he worked. And I don't remember that being very long. And then I had also a job working for the sheriff's wife, coming in, because in Brown County in Aberdeen, the sheriff lived right in the jail, and so my job was to help cook and feed the inmates. I didn't last very long there. I got fired, and so that was pretty hard on me to be fired. I had never encountered that.
Would this be the 1950s, 1960s? One of those?
That was in the 60s.
60s, yeah.
Yeah. No, probably late 59, early 1960s. And then eventually my one aunt, she had a friend that worked for Northern State. They called it Teachers College back then, but now it's called North Dakota University. Had a friend that worked in the cafeteria being the salad lady. So I went in and I worked with her a whole year being her assistant. And then in the summer she decided to retire, so then I was on my own. And then I worked on my own for a while. And then in the second year, in the spring, my father committed suicide, and my uncle came and told me what had happened, and they never called me back. So I feel they held that against me. And then I just moved home and helped my mom sell the farm and come to Aberdeen and help her find a house. And then I ended up going to college in Rapid City, and then I found that job in Aberdeen, and then that's how I moved to Minneapolis.
When you went to Aberdeen, let's say, did you miss the farm?
No, because life was easy. We didn't have to carry in water. We didn't have to go outside to the bathroom. We didn't have to milk cows. There were no chores. I mean, it was easy.
Did you, when you were growing up, when you were a young teenager at least, did you think that you were going to end up on the farm, or did you think you were going to leave the farm someday?
Well, that's a good question. I don't remember what I had decided. All I knew is in my mind is that I always wanted to go work in the office. That was but I don't remember if I had that dream on the farm. But I know that once I went to Aberdeen and I worked as a waitress and a car hop and salad lady, I knew this was not my thing. I knew I had to do something better.
So then you went to Cargill. When would that have been?
I started at February 20th, 1967.
And how long were you at Cargill?
42 years. I retired December 31st, 2008.
And what type of things did you do in Cargill?
I worked strictly in the grain division doing accounting work. And that was quite an experience working there 42 years, because when I first started there, everything was done by hand. We had ledgers done by hand. We had computers, but we would prepare the memos and stuff, and they would get sent to another department, and they got keyed into the system so that the people that did the P&Ls would have all the information there, what was bought and what was sold. And the communication was done with telexes, which kind of reminds me today of texting on the telephone, except the big difference is that you abbreviated everything, because everything you were charged per character, not like today where you can ramble on as long as you want. There's no individual charge. And then the other thing I remember about the telex is it reminds me now when you go to a store like up in northern Minnesota, where the wooden floor and the cashier is maybe upstairs, and so you would write this email and you put it in the tube, and then the tube would go up this pipe and come out the other end, and the same way when you got an answer, it came down the pipe, and they would plug up every once in a while, and they had to call in the repairman and get that all out of the pipe so he could send telexes.
I know now that you're writing about some of your experiences. What are some of the things that you're writing about?
Well, right now, I'm kind of more in the current stuff, because one of the big things that I feel was a big change in my life is we grew up on the farm. I grew up on the farm. Well, I didn't know how to swim. There was no lakes. And people would come up and say, well, why didn't you learn how to swim in the stock tank? And I went, oh, wow, I wouldn't want to swim in there where the cows drool in and all the algae in there. No, thanks. And so and I'm a member of the Lifetime Fitness Club. So I went to their manager and I said, do you have any lesson? Do you teach seniors how to swim? And they said, yes, they do. So they found me one swim coach, and she didn't last long. Then I found me another one and didn't last long. But now I have one that's in her 60s, and she taught me how to swim. And so then in January of this year, she convinced me to do a triathlon, an indoor triathlon. So I had to swim 10 minutes, go on the treadmill 20 minutes, and the spin bike 30 minutes, and I accomplished all of that. I thought, wow, I would have never dreamt that I would have been able to accomplish that, ever.
That's quite an achievement, actually. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
What do you think? There you are, a teenage girl, and so you can compare for me life on the farm as a teenage girl, and then life in the city as a teenage girl.
life for me on the farm as a teenage girl was very hard because my dad was very strict. And so I can basically say I had no friends. And the big thing back then for entertainment would have been to go to wedding dances, to Strasbourg, to wedding dances. And I asked my mom if I could go to the wedding dance, and my dad said no. And that ended it. And so I can tell you that weeks on end would go by, and the only time I would leave the farm is to go to church on Sunday and back home.
Was your family very religious?
No, I wouldn't say they were very religious. They just went to church on Sunday and that was it. It was just that he was very strict. And the other thing that made it very unusual is that when adults would come over to the house to visit, we were not allowed to stay in the same room. We had to disappear. If we didn't, we got a lecture. And so the only time we were in the rooms when there were other adults is when they would come over. Well, we would call it dinner. It's really, call it lunch nowadays, but it was dinner. And so then we would have to help prepare the meal and then help serve the meal, and then we would eat and then wash the dishes. And then we had to disappear. Other than that, we were not allowed in the same room.
Did you have cousins or anything? You used to come over and visit people your age?
Well, back then too, not that many came because cars were a problem and there's no money. And so like my mom's 3 sisters from Aberdeen would come frequently, but their children were all basically younger than me. And then my dad had a brother in Bismarck. They would come periodically, and again, their children were younger than me. And then I think a couple of times my dad took us all over to Etchley, and he had a brother over there that they had girls that were my age, so I enjoyed that, but that was infrequently.
Would you consider yourself poor growing up?
Consider?
Did you consider yourself poor when you were growing up?
Yes, very poor.
But at the time when you were growing up, did you think you were poor, or is that in hindsight?
That's hindsight.
So really, you didn't know money, so you didn't know you didn't have money? Is that?
That's right. We didn't have money. We didn't know it. I agree.
Okay, I know that you wrote for an anthology that was put together, I think, by your German group up here. What did you write for that? You wrote a couple articles for the book?
I wrote, I have to think. I know the one thing that I wrote about is in 1954, my dad had bought a brand new car. It was a 1954 Bel Air Chevrolet, four-door, gray and white sedan. And they decided they were going to take a family trip. So there was my dad and my mom and my uncle and aunt, and then Kathy and I and a cousin. So we got in the car and we drove to Nolam, and we didn't stop and eat at any restaurants. We would, if it was time to eat, my mom and my aunt packed lunches, so we would eat that, and we would get rest stops at the filling station where the car needed more fuel. And then when we got to Nolam, we stayed at my grandma's house the whole time. I mean, back then it was unheard of going out to eat or staying in a hotel. They would have been very offended. And so we stayed there the whole time, and my dad had a brother that lived next door to my grandparents, so I don't remember eating there either, but I know they took us to one of their friends' house that they had all these chinchillas in the basement that they raised for money, because they were in cages stacked from the floor to the ceiling. And so then I was questioned in that book, and she said, well, did you pet any of these? Well, we couldn't because they were all in cages, and I guess they didn't understand that when you grow up on the farm, animals really aren't your pets. They're just animals. And at that time, all the fur that came off of the chinchilla was used for fur collars or fur coats, and it was a big deal back then to have a nice wool coat with a fur collar on it. So.
How did your grandmother get down there?
How my grandma got down there?
Yeah.
Well, when my grandma and grandpa retired I don't remember what year they retired. They moved to New Ulm. Why, I don't know. The only thing I can figure out is that their daughter was living in New Ulm, so they moved to New Ulm. And they lived there in New Ulm till maybe 1962. Then they moved to Aberdeen. And then they lived in Aberdeen till about 67, 68. Then they moved back to New Ulm.
And just funny because that's German, but it's not really German-Russian over there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, see, when I grew up, it's not like it is in today's environment. Parents share stories with their family. None of that was shared with us, so we just kind of have to guess why it happened.
So really didn't talk about your grandparents? I mean, your parents didn't talk about their grandparents and their stories and that sort of thing?
No. And see, so that's why I find it very interesting. So I've been doing a lot of reading of, what they all went through, not so much my grandparents, but their grandparents and what they went through over in Germany and then to Russia and then coming to the U.S. And while my mom would share stories like when she grew up on the farm, like in the dirty 30s, how she would walk the prairie land and pick up cow chips, and the cow chips were what they used to burn to keep the house warm. Or they would pile the manure in stacks and then cut it and use it for firewood. And she would talk about the ham that they would have that would have probably an inch or so fat on it, and so then they would take the fat and glue it under the chair so they didn't have to eat it, because she talked about eating fat sandwiches and they didn't like it. So, and she would talk about that. But me and my dad were not really what you would call daughter and father relationship. He hardly ever talked to me, and when I tried talking to him, he always acted like he couldn't hear me, and so after I would say it 2 or 3 times, I would get frustrated and just not do it, you know. So
That must have been tough.
it was tough. So I in my mind today, I say that I really don't feel my father accepted me, because back then it was important that the firstborn was a son to take over the farm, and I wasn't that. And so, I mean, nothing was ever said to me that that's what it really was, but that's what my intuition is telling me.
Did he act different than your brother?
Oh yeah, he really liked my older brother. He was very happy when he was born.
Did that brother end up taking over the farm?
Nope. My mom sold it. When my dad died, the 2 brothers the older one was 8 and the other one was 5. And so she moved the whole family to Aberdeen. And then the older brother, he went to, not Wapaton, to become a draftsman. So he was a draftsman for a while. And he met this girl close to Aberdeen, and her family owned some land on the farm, and so he went into milking business, but now he's driving the North Dakota highway truck, plowing fields, or not the highway, and fixing signs and that kind of stuff.
So you had 2 brothers. Neither of them went in the farm?
And the other brother, he's down in Oklahoma City. He's an engineer.
I'm not going to ask you about your sister, because I'll let her tell her own story.
Yep, I'm going to...
But the 2 of you ended up here in Minneapolis, living and working together?
Yes.
Did you work at Cargill too?
Yes. Well, I guess I must have decided internally, I don't know for sure, that it was too expensive to live alone, and so we just kind of got used to living with each other. So we've lived together ever since.
So you and your sister must have a good relationship then.
Well, I will say it's probably like a married couple. I mean, we have our disagreements and agreements. So, I mean, you know, how you get up in the morning, you don't feel so good, and you kind of get grouchy. You know, we have that same issue.
Was she like the friend? A few years younger, but was she like your friend on the farm then when you?
No, we didn't get along.
Is there anything else about? I mean, we're mostly centering on the farm stuff in our documentary. So you experienced both farm and town, city life. I think you might have a perspective. Do you think that the role is different for women on a farm than when you were younger on a farm?
Well, I guess it depends. I think like a farm woman probably in the state of Minnesota, and if they don't have a German background, I would say probably a lot of them, they're out in the helping out, trying to make money, trying to figure out how to make money, or they go to town and have another job to supplement the family. Where I grew up, from what I hear, not much has changed. You know, that the woman's job is at home in the house, and, you know, milking cows and feeding chickens and that kind of stuff.
And then feeding everybody, really.
Right, and feeding everybody, yep.
Did you have farm hands that you guys had to make food for during, like, harvesting season?
Well, See, and I don't remember when we used to trash with the trashing machine. I don't remember that. But I know that I can remember when we started combining, we didn't have anybody. The only time that I remember we had somebody around a lot was when we would cut the corn for silage. We had somebody come over and cut it, and then my dad would haul it home and put it on the pile and pack it down, and that would be probably a couple weeks. Other than that, I don't remember.
So you remember you having to make meals and bring them out to people?
The only time we did is when we had that guy come and cut silage. We laugh about that nowadays too, that people talk about lunch, and when I grew up, lunch was like a big sandwich, and and I don't remember, but enough food there for probably 2 or 3 meals. And now, when we talk about lunch, you may have a bowl of soup and maybe a half a sandwich.
But you're not working in the fields either.
No, we aren't. I mean, and I can remember, the 3 meals we ate on the farm. I probably don't even eat that much in one meal now.
It's a different time, that's for sure.
Right.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't talked about?
Well, I guess even, like the religion, like the Catholics were, because we grew up Catholic, and the Catholics back then, it was like very, very strict, like we lived kind of what I would consider kind of like in a colony, because there's a big area, it was all Catholics, and the Lutherans were in a different area, and like when you go to town, the Catholics would hang around the Catholics and not the non-Catholics, and when a Catholic woman or a Catholic man would hire or would marry a non-Catholic, that would destroy the whole family relationship. I mean, they wouldn't want nothing to do, and the daughter or the son was totally disowned. And so that part has, drastically changed. And I think going to school too has like really, really changed. I mean, when I think about now, one teacher would teach all 8 grades in all the subjects, and now when they go to school in town, I mean, there's a teacher for every grade, and sometimes there's even a teacher for 1 or 2 subjects, and so I just really wonder nowadays how they really did that, to be able to teach, the lessons, and then have the different groups, and still keep it all together, and being able to figure out, well, this person needs help, that person needs help. I think that has changed drastically. And then the other thing that I think that has changed drastically is going to the grocery store. I mean, what we were able to buy and what you can buy nowadays, that's unbelievable. I mean, you really don't even have to cook. You can just go buy TV dinners, or you can go in the deli and buy whatever you want and come home and eat it. That was never an option. We never even went out to eat. Kathy and I didn't really go out to eat till we came to Minneapolis, and we lived here for quite a while because we didn't have any money to go out and eat. And when we did, it was places like McDonald's or somewhere, really cheap, and also going out to eat was also a lot more cheaper than we have now, like I can remember when I first started at Cargill, we could go buy a cup of coffee for 10 cents. and a roll for 10 cents. Oh, one other thing I guess I didn't tell you, when I was working at the college, I had my own room. I rented a room from this lady that was probably 2 or 3 blocks from the college, so I could walk back and forth. And so I only had the room, so I would eat a couple meals at the college, but weekends I was on my own, and breakfast I had on my own. So I would improvise. I would buy a box of cereal, and I bought the instant milk, and that's how I would make my breakfast. And then on weekends, I can remember going to Woolworths, and I would buy a banana split. That would be my lunch or my dinner or whatever. And to think I only spent 49 cents for this huge banana split, like 3 big scoops of ice cream and, chocolate and strawberry. I don't remember what other kind of syrup, and the big banana. And now when I think about, wow, did I eat terrible? And I would also eat like Twinkies and Hostess cakes that you could buy for a dime. And I sit back and I think, wow, I had quite a diet.